And an update on Uber's ongoing search for a new chief executive. Jeff Immelt, the General Electric chairman, is said to be the front runner for the vacant CEO slot at the ride-hailing company. That's according to Recode. Immelt stepped down as GE CEO at the beginning of the month. Uber's board of directors may vote within 2 weeks on co-founder Travis Kalanick's successor. Joining us now from New York, Michael Wolff, founder of Activate, who served on the board of multiple companies, including Yahoo, and was formerly president at MTV Networks. With me here in the studio, Bloomberg tech reporter Eric Newcomer, who covers Uber for us. So what do we know? And by the way, you were the first to report Jeff Immelt's name, I should say, that he was even in contention for this job.
Right. And that was back when Meg was sort of seen as the Meg Whitman was seen as the very serious candidate, and she dropped out soon after that report. Yeah, and Jeff's basically been the only sort of solid candidate since the Meg reports surfaced, and so he sort of seemed like the front runner the whole time. I mean, there's this continued fight between Benchmark and Travis Kalanick and some of the other board members. So it's hard to know exactly if someone's a front runner given the great divide on the board. But given that he's the only sort of public candidate, he seems clearly to be the front runner.
So we know that some board members like him, but it's not clear how many. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
So what is it that he brings to the table that they like?
Right. I mean, I think for a long time, what did they want in Uber CEO? We wanted sort of the global operations experience, some sort of statesperson, heft, former CEO, and then someone with a tech vision. And with him, you seem to get 2 out of the 3. It's really been hard to find anyone who seems to have all 3. And I think the hope for people close to Travis is that he can continue to play that role as some sort of advisor, saying this is where we should go in terms of technology.
They're also looking though for someone who isn't going to be pushed around,
right?
And Michael, obviously you joined the Yahoo board as Marissa Mayer was coming on as CEO, so sort of how hard a CEO changeover can be.
Very tough.
What do you think is important? What do you think the biggest challenges are going to be in this particular situation at Uber?
Well, the board had a couple of directions in which it could go. On one side, it could hire a digital innovator, somebody native to the web who focused on user experience. If they end up choosing Jeff Immelt, then what they're really focusing on is sales and operations effectiveness and respectability in terms of culture. And so some of the challenges for somebody coming in is striking the right balance between what is really an internet company at its core with the user experience, and at the same time has to move into areas like self-driving cars and real operational excellence. And there's something else which is important here, which they really give up with Travis, which is this drive to work with cities, municipalities, and countries in order to allow Uber to operate. And we forget one of the things that having a founder in place is that founders tend not to ask for permission. They beg for forgiveness later. And by bringing in somebody who's an established manager from a large company, then one does wonder whether or not they're going to be able to continue to that drive and that ability to push their way into new markets and keep themselves in those markets.
Go ahead, Eric.
I want to seize on that point. I mean, it's sort of funny to hear Travis's regulatory recklessness phrased quite that way. I think there are plenty of board members right now ready to see Uber move past a period of, in the case of grayballing, potentially law breaking, under probes.
By grayballing, you're talking about a situation in which Uber, knowingly evaded the law.
Yeah,
which isn't the only.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this Indian rape case, and there's the Waymo lawsuit that's ongoing. So I think, sure, Travis needed to be aggressive in the beginning, and pushing in regulatorily sort of hazy areas allowed Uber to be successful and, as they would say, break down the taxi cartel. But I think everybody at the company is ready for an Uber that's less worried about whether San Francisco is going to shut down their self-driving cars, or some new law enforcement official is going to come after them, or they're going to get sued again. I think they're ready to put their regulatory risk behind them and want sort of a statesperson like CEO.
This game. this game.
Yeah, go ahead. We have about 30 seconds, Michael.
Right. This game is really far from behind us. I think that we've got services like Lyft that are gaining market share in a lot of countries. Uber is either not the leading service or risks giving up that leading service. So I think it's going to require continued aggressiveness in dealing with these markets. It may be about managing against the law, but at the same time, it's going to require that.
All right, Michael Wolf of Activate, you are sticking with me. Eric Newcomer, can't wait till you have more details. Thank you, as always, for stopping by. Coming up, the solar eclipse got everyone's attention today. Even President Trump donned glasses and didn't for a portion of the eclipse. We'll talk about the excitement coming up. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Emma Chandra in New York, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Catalonia police say all members of the terror cell behind last week's deadly van attack in Barcelona are either dead or under arrest. The regional police chief confirmed 2 officers shot and killed Younes Abu Yaqub today, and authorities say the man authorities say was behind the wheel of the van. The U.S. Embassy in Russia will suspend issuing non-immigrant visas for 8 days starting Wednesday. It's in response to the Kremlin's decision to cut more than 750 positions from U.S. consulates across Russia. The U.S. will resume issuing visas September 1st, but Russians have to travel to Moscow for interviews. Iraqi forces are making progress retaking the town of Tal Afar, about 45 miles west of Mosul. That's according to the US-led coalition, which says Iraqi forces have retaken about 95 square miles from the extremist group since the operation began Sunday. President Emmanuel Macron's office has published a charter detailing the role his wife will play during his term. There will be no official budget for Brigitte Macron, nor will she be formally designated First Lady. France does not have a formal title for presidential spouses. And Big Ben will be silent over the next 4 years for repair work. It sounded for the last time today. It's the longest period of silence since 1859. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Emma Chandra, this is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 7:30 Tuesday morning in Melbourne, Australia. I'm joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen with a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Morning, Emma. Well, it's looking a little bit weaker on the Nikkei this morning. ASX futures are barely stronger, up by just 4 points at the moment. But we may have a few earnings to drive the market today. Oil Search will be out with numbers later. And also before the open, the world's biggest miner, BHP, will release full-year earnings. We're expected to see a huge 6-fold increase in underlying profit to $7.3 billion. The dividend also estimated to surge to 88 cents. And that might go some way towards appeasing Elliott management that's been pushing aggressively for change at BHP. Could have more today also on China Overseas Land and Investment. This is the second largest Chinese property developer in Hong Kong. First half profits soaring on Monday with shares up as well. We'll have more reaction on that. And elsewhere, China State Construction International will also report earnings, and we're waiting on Hong Kong CPI figures for July. That's expected to see some strengthening to 2% on year. I'm Paul Allen in Melbourne. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
The once-in-a-lifetime total solar eclipse has come and gone, and it put the U.S. power grid to the test. Grid operators, utility owners, and electricity generators brace for more than 12,000 megawatts of solar power possibly going offline. Sunrun is the largest independent solar developer in the U.S. Its CEO, Lynn Jurich, spoke earlier today with Bloomberg Television during the height of the eclipse on the East Coast.
I think the best part about the sun is that it is so reliable. So when these eclipses happen, which happen, once a generation, as you mentioned, we have a lot of advance notice. So we were really able to work with the grid operators, and were able to, procure power to meet the needs during the eclipse. And I think it's important to put this into context too. When you look at our overall traditional power sources, they go offline all the time and without a lot of notice. And in fact, annually, they will go out to the tune of 9,000 times the amount of power loss that we'll see from this eclipse. So the sun really is there, it's reliable, and we're certainly asking our customers to turn their power down and enjoy it.
So is this in a way testing how you react in an event where we have solar power as a dominant force in the provision of power generation in the country? So you can look at what the options are in terms of just switching between one and the other, because as you said, in terms of solar power, I mean, that's what the most reliable source of energy actually that we have out there.
It is, and the cost reductions have been so significant that it really is becoming the dominant source of new generation. And you know, the segment that my company operates in, which is on the rooftop, also adds a different dimension. And you know, we often think about renewables as all, you know, sort of one and the same, but there's a difference between, you know, the large utility scale type renewables and what we do at the home level, which is really pushing out using the rooftop to produce the power, using your electric vehicle to store the power, getting a battery on this grid. And what we're going to see is a system that will be much more reliable with the addition of this rooftop solar, the storage, and the electric vehicles. And I really look forward to that.
But Lynn, to Julia's point here, I mean, we have been talking to power grid operators and utilities and scientists that are sort of going to use this as an opportunity to test their systems, their software, et cetera. Is there anything you at Sunrun are doing during the eclipse? Are you testing battery capacity, for example? What exactly are you all going to be observing?
Well, for our customers, you know, we have about 150,000 customers across the country, so a full gigawatt of power. And, you know, we certainly can test to see exactly how our systems will produce during this eclipse, and we will do that, and we'll record the data. We'll also look at what the consumer patterns are. So were we successful when we ask our consumers to, you know, bring their consumption down? Were we successful doing that? And those are important learnings. But again, because this eclipse is, you know, an eclipse actually in any given point across the world happens once every 300 to 400 years, so it's fairly rare. And so what we're more focused on is how do we get the storage piece to be cost effective so that when there's a situation like this, we're able to you know, fill up the battery with the solar power and dispatch it to the grid when the grid needs it most.
Lynn Jurich there, CEO of Sunrun, speaking earlier on Bloomberg Television. Now, millions of people across the U.S. marveled at this total solar eclipse using everything from specially designed glasses to live streams, even virtual reality in order to catch a glimpse of an eclipse that last occurred in America nearly a century ago. One person who went outside to watch, our Bloomberg tech executive editor, Tom Giles. A whole group of you went down. What did you see?
Well, we used everything from very unsophisticated cereal box viewer, our colleague Brad Stone. I used some of those Google glasses that that I think you tested out earlier in the week. We saw people looking with their naked eye. I kind of wanted to shout over, I don't think you're supposed to do that. But you know, here in San Francisco, it was a little cloudy, it was a little foggy. We're
about 70%.
Covered about 70% of the sun, that's right. A little anticlimactic here, but the thing about this eclipse, given the ubiquity of social media, when we got back into the office, you could hear, you could look on Facebook, you could look on Twitter, see the experiences of people across the country who were in the path of totality. I saw people posting photos just saying like, hey, my son just took this. It's like changed his life. You know, I was listening to people in South Carolina cheer as the sun went completely dark. So really, for some people, it had a very profound impact.
I actually did cover a solar eclipse in China in 2009 and was in the path of totality. So going to complete darkness, there's definitely this sort of magical, eerie feeling. The temperature completely cools, and you definitely heard people talking about that across the country. It was, as you say, sort of this communal moment. Even the president watched. He got a lot of flack on Twitter for looking up briefly without the glasses. We're looking at him now. He just took them off. But when he came out onto the balcony, there he is. There he looks up.
Very briefly. Hopefully he didn't do too much damage to his eyes, although people were, you can hear in the video, people down below the balcony shouting, hey, don't look. I mean, this was one of those moments, and I've seen essays about this, where this was an opportunity for the nation to come together and focus on something different, hopefully wearing glasses, without kind of the moment being upset by Washington, D.C. And yet, here's what happens. The president found a way to steal the thunder from this event as well.
Yet again, everyone had a different live stream up. NASA had a live stream. Twitter and the Weather Channel did a partnership, of course. It was all over cable news, but it was interesting to see how various tech companies, from Google to Twitter to Airbnb, actually turned this into a business opportunity.
We're able to really benefit from it. We talked to Airbnb. There were thousands of people along that path who rented their homes, in some instances for the very first time.
Right.
So they had this huge many-fold, I don't know exactly, can't remember exactly the number, surge in listings because people were wanting to be there. And if you look at Google Maps, you saw traffic patterns acutely, very red in that path of totality.
And in fact, there were some folks in Idaho who I believe spent a lot of money and it rained, and yet they were still happy about the experience. So it was an all-around experience, I guess, to commune and watch this. As you're hearing there, looking at people in the path of totality.
People throwing parties. I was on a plane recently and a guy got sidelined going through security because he had a pair of welder's goggles. Although even there's only like a certain number that you're supposed to use.
Right, so he was prepared. All right, Tom Giles, thanks so much for sharing your experience with us. Come and gone. Coming up, how one UK fintech lender is providing postgraduate loans to international students. We'll bring you the very latest next. This is Bloomberg. Texting and crossing the street could not only be hazardous to your health, but also your wallet, at least in Stamford, Connecticut, which may become the second U.S. city this year to combat the problem with fines. Just last month, Honolulu adopted an ordinance to outlaw smartphone use by pedestrians crossing streets. Stamford's proposed cell phone crosswalk ban would have the police issuing citations of $30 per violation. U.S. pedestrian deaths have been on the rise, but there are no stats that show whether texting played a role in any of the fatalities. Now to a story out of the UK. One fintech firm is looking to help students get loan, foreign students that is. For more on this company, I want to hand it over to my colleague Caroline Hyde out in London. Caroline?
Emily, thank you very much indeed. Yes, indeed. Prodigy Finance has just announced it's completed a fundraise of $240 million, helping more international students, particularly from the emerging markets, receive loans based on projected earnings rather than historical credit. Now, the cash is comprised of a $40 million Series C equity round led by international VC firm Index Ventures, as well as a $200 million debt facility led by an unnamed global investment bank. Now, I spoke with Cameron Stevens. He's the founder and CEO of Prodigy Finance and asked, well, how the debt portion will be used.
We provide loans to postgraduate students studying internationally. Why that's difficult is they can't get any sources of finance from local banks, because if you're coming from Ghana to study at Oxford or at Harvard, the US banks won't look at you because you don't have a credit record. The UK banks won't look at you. There's no product in Ghana. So you're basically someone with phenomenal potential at one of the top universities who has no access to funding. And so our challenge has been scaling the amount of funding that we have to lend through our platform. We're a fairly classic fintech platform in that we're making loans to, in this case, international postgraduate students, which are funded by investors. Those include alumni from the universities and family offices, and more recently, a large institution, which is our first institutional round of funding coming in, this $200 million of debt. And that will be used to really expand the number of students that we're able to fund, as we sit with a situation where we have a huge amount of demand to cover. And really a challenge in scaling up the funding. So this will be directly used to increase our ability to fund more people.
And what sort of returns are we talking about here? How does a student go about paying back? What sort of interest rate are they paying?
So typically our students, it's a range of about 5 to 8% above LIBOR. And the return to the investors, we just charge a platform servicing fee and an upfront fee. And then investors are getting the balance. So typically an investor will get around sort of LIBOR plus 4.5. So it means a yield, if you think about sort of forward LIBOR, of about 5.5%, 6% over the life of the loan. So students take about, typically they would go and study. They have a grace period when they're studying, and then they have about 7 years or 10 years to repay the loan.
What about potential risk credit ratings do you give to individuals? How are you doing the background checks on each particular student that comes and knocks on your door for funding? And indeed, have you seen any potential unreliability in repayments?
So this was one of the things when we set out, which was one of the most complicated things to get right. It was trying to understand, what are the problems the banks have in lending across borders? Because it seemed pretty fundamental. The whole bank risk model is built around you have credit data in one home country. You move one street across in London as a UK citizen, and a bank is going to think you are incredibly mobile. I don't want to be worried about you. When you can move to Singapore tomorrow, you're still on LinkedIn, you're still on your social networks, and that sort of concept of location and risk has changed. So, but we had to think about, well, how do we assess people? And we're trying to do two things. We're trying to assess what is someone's ability to repay the loan, and then if they have the ability, will they actually repay?